7 Scary Medieval Ghost Stories. Number 7. The Bloody Head. A legend about the Saint Edmund who surrendered to the Vikings was told by the famous writer Alfred of the 10th and 11th centuries. By converting them to Christianity, Edmund sought to stop them from robbing the English coastline. However, after tormenting Edmund, they simply laughed at him and chopped off his head before tossing it into the woods. In accordance with then existing church doctrine, a person's head had to be buried alongside their body to ensure that they were complete when they appeared before God on the Day of Judgment. The location of the head's throw was well known to someone who had witnessed the execution. The head of Edmund eventually called back to the search party after they had gone into the woods and called to his soul. Yeah, right here. Any other animals were prevented from feasting on the head because it was being protected by a wolf. After getting his head back, Edmund was buried. Number 6. The Domain of the Dead. Fitma of Leesburg, a significant historian of the Holy Roman Empire who lived in the 11th century, includes tales of furious spirits in his chronicle. He remarked, "My niece told me the story about Bishop Baudry from Utrecht and caused the abyss of St. Laurent Abbey. The Slavs had largely damaged the church in the city of Divina. Therefore, the bishop approved its renovation and rededication. The surgery was given to the priest to oversee. The priest once observed dead people attending mass and chanting psalms inside a church. He told the bishop, who gave the priest permission to spend the night at the church. The priest awoke the following night to find himself in the bed he was lying on being physically thrown out of the church by the dead. Going back to the bishop, the priest appeared angry and shaken. Now he had to surround himself with sacred relics and sprinkle holy water over the church. You must never leave the church that is under your care, the bishop instructed him. Fear doesn't discourage him from doing his job. The priest remained in the building. The dead arrived and brought up his body before it on the altar the following night while I was awake. Then they surrounded him with a kindling fire and held his body down till he perished in the flames. When the bishop learned what had occurred, he commanded that a 3-day contrite mass be organized so the priest might obtain the assistance he needs for a soul to enter paradise. Number 5. A Demonic Visitor. French Benedictine chronicle Rodolphe Labor started his work. He presented a history of France and Burgundy in 1028. It included a detailed description of his close brush with Rodel the demon. At St. Legos Monastery, the monk was first lodged in shampoo. A little figure emerged from the foot of the bed and approached him just before matins in the early morning's low light. It looked like a terrifying thing, the figure. He had a thin neck, an emaciated face, and chilly black eyes. He was of average height. The forehead had prominent lines and creases. He had a large mouth with flabby lips and a thin nose. His ears were also pointed and hairy, and he had a goat-like beard that covered his sharp chin. He had matted hair that stood up on the ends and canine-like teeth. Its head was conical. His knees were shaking and he had a bloated chest. His clothes were filthy and his whole body shook. He said, abruptly whacking the bedhead with his palm, "You won't be staying here much longer." The ghoul was still there when Rodel first awakened in a panic, gnashing his teeth and repeating the same thing. The monk leapt from his bed and dashed for Blessed Father Benedict's altar. Once there, he knelt down and spent some time there in complete terror. He repeated as he lay there, bewildered and hopeless. Number 4. The Gift of Snakes and Toads. Caesarius was a Cistercian monk who wrote a treatise about Christian doctrine and morality to which he related this story. A knight passed away and left his son on his entire estate. He had accumulated his vast wealth by making loans. One evening, he brazenly knocked on his son's door and approached it. Why he was knocking, the servant inquired. The knight introduced himself and said, "I'm your lord, let me in." Even though the servant saw the spirit, he refused to let him in when he peered out. The servant would not answer the door as the spectral knight kept knocking. "Take my dinner, which is these fish, to my son," he commanded the servant. "On this doorknob, I'll leave them dangling." His son had discovered many snakes and toads tied together crawling at the entrance the following morning. Now that we are aware that this is the food purportedly served in hell and that it is prepared in flaming sulfur. Number 3. The Witch of Berkeley. Women were usually portrayed as clever and malevolent during the medieval ages. In folklore, they were commonly represented as concubines, witches, and mystics. William of Berkeley recorded this story in the 11th century. When a woman involved in the evil profession of soothsaying and divination hears from a deity, she realizes that it is a prophecy of her death. She learns of one of her son's death nearly instantly. She gathers her two last offspring, a young nun and a monk, and teaches them the religious duties they must fulfill in order to spare her the eternal agony alongside the demons she worshipped during her lifetime in the furnaces of hell. However, it is all in vain because the rites are ineffective and demons compel the woman to emerge from her tomb. She was then forced to wear a fearsome black horse that was waiting. She is tossed upon the hooks after the horse, which has iron spikes along the length of its back, has been ridden away. Number 2. A demon at the cradle. In the 12th century, cleric Walter Map served in the court of Henry II of England. His collection of trinkets for the courts, which was written in the 1180s, contains odd tales like the one below. A knight cherished his noble-born wife dearly. The morning after the birth of their first child, the baby's body was found with its neck slashed. Their second and third children experienced the same thing. The husband often fasted and prayed because he was scared while his wife was carrying their fourth child. Fires and candles were lit all around the baby boy to keep him safe as the family kept vigil. Then a tired traveler arrived, asking for hospitality in the name of God. He was received, and he was both welcomed and kept under observation at the same time. Had gone to sleep except for the stranger, who saw an elderly woman come over to the fire and take up the child. When the stranger seized her, she was just ready to slit the child's throat. Everyone gathered to witness the murder of the city's most admired woman. She remained silent when her name was questioned. She was labeled as the demon by the stranger, who also used the church key to mark her face as a symbol of her depravity. Then he ordered them to bring back the woman who resembled the demon exactly, and whom they thought the good lady had sent for. The branding mark was identical as well. According to the stranger, because the genuine lady is righteous and beloved by God, the devil envies her and wishes to drag her down with them. They dispatched a wicked ghost in her image to cast an evil hex at her. When it was recognized, the monster was located, given a name, and thrown out of the window, shrieking and screaming. The Ghost of an Ant. Number 1. During the 12th century, Augustinian Canon William of Newbury lived. He was a key author of tales about revenants from the Middle Ages. Here is one of his stories about deceased restless. Leaving the York region, a misbehaving man sought safety at the Ants' fortress. When the ruler granted him a post overseeing the treasury, the guy immediately began making plans to increase his personal wealth. He took a wife for himself, and when he pretended to be away for a few days on a business trip, he was filled with envy. With the aid of a maid, the man returns home undetected and hides in the bedroom in order to see what his wife would do while he was supposed to be away. He lay across from her in the rafters. He was furious that the man had fallen between the beam and ended up between his wife and their young neighbor, and he was frightened to witness her making love to him. The shrewd wife attempted to save her husband when the young neighbor fled, but he mistakenly accused her of betraying him and promised to punish her. She said he was crazy and had a disease. The priest was summoned when the guy fainted as a result of the fall. People tried to get the person to confess and take communion, but he said he could wait until the next day. As a result, the man passed away that evening without receiving the dying person's grace. Despite this, he received a decent funeral. However, it had little impact. Every night, Satan prodded the man's body to wander around the houses, and he was followed by the terrible howling. The town soon became abandoned. The priest began to seek assistance for the final town residents' psalm. He convened a meeting on Sunday following a lengthy religious service. Two young guys, both of whose fathers had perished in a plague, picked up pickaxes and decided to take action, digging up the sick corpse and burning it. When the two brothers arrived at the cemetery and dug up the body, they discovered that it was swollen and malformed with an enormous face. The men started to attack the corpse. The body's blood poured so profusely that it saturated the ground surrounding the grave. When the brothers realized that it was a vampire feeding on the blood of everyone in the town, they dragged the body away. Although these tales may not seem particularly spooky to those of us who are accustomed to the horror tales of Poe, Lovecraft, and King, it must be kept in mind that people who lived in the Middle Ages would have been horrified by the idea of spirits being trapped here on the earth and unable to move on. Religion and what happened to their souls after they died were very important to people in the Middle Ages. And that concludes Just Gotta Watch's 7 Scary Medieval Ghost Stories. Thanks for watching.